You are the light of the world. You are the light of the world. A wise child makes a glad father. Be kind to one another. Personality profiles dedicated to Sharon. My sister Sharon. And today we're going to focus on Mary Magdalene, 1797. Again, this is the personality profiles page way in the back of the Life Application Study Bible. 1797, 1797, 1797, 1797. Okay, 1793, 1797. Here we go. Mary Magdalene, 1797. And it's in the red section of the Bible. Predictions and preparations for the supernatural visitor. The life and teachings of the supernatural visitor, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And then Acts to Revelation. The first peoples to get the supernatural powers of the supernatural visitor. Mary Magdalene. Okay, here we go. What do we have to say here? The absence of women among the 12 disciples has bothered a few people. But it is clear that there were many women among Jesus' followers. It is also clear that Jesus did not treat women as others in his culture did. He treated them with dignity as people with worth, value. Mary of Magdala was an early follower of Jesus who certainly deserves to be called a disciple, an energetic, impulsive, caring woman. She not only traveled with Jesus, but also contributed to the needs of the group. She was present at the crucifixion and was on her way to anoint Jesus' body on Sunday morning when she discovered the empty tomb. Mary was the first to see Jesus after his resurrection. Mary Magdalene is a heartwarming example of thankful living. Her life was miraculously freed by Jesus when he drove 7 demons out of her. In every glimpse we have of her, she was acting out of her appreciation for the freedom Christ had given her. That freedom allowed her to stand under Christ's cross when all the disciples except John were hiding in fear. That's a good point. John was standing at the foot of the cross with Mary Magdalene and Jesus' mother. The other disciples were not there. They had hidden themselves. After Jesus' death, she, Mary Magdalene, intended to give his body every respect. Like the rest of Jesus' followers, she never expected his bodily resurrection, but she was overjoyed to discover it. Mary's faith was not complicated, but it was direct and genuine. She was more eager to believe and obey than to understand everything. Remember, knowing God means knowing that you don't have to understand everything. You actually just have to follow. Like Naaman the Syrian, the little voice of the Israelite slave girl said, "Why don't you just do what the man of God told you to do? Why don't you just do what the person of authority in your midst has to say? Why don't you just follow the voice of authority that has been given to you? Not try to understand, but just follow and see what happens." Mary was more eager to believe and obey than to understand everything. Jesus honored her childlike faith by appearing to her first and by entrusting her with the first message of his resurrection. What are the strengths and accomplishments of Mary Magdalene? She contributed to the needs of Jesus and his disciples, one of the few faithful followers present at Jesus' death on the cross. First, to see the risen Jesus. Weaknesses and mistake. Jesus had to drive 7 demons out of her. Now, how come those who are obedient, weaknesses and mistakes. Jesus had to drive 7 demons out of her. Lessons from her life. Those who are obedient grow in understanding. Those who are focused on the man of God grow in understanding. Women are vital to Jesus' ministry. Jesus relates to women as he created them, as equal reflectors of God's image. Vital statistics, where? Magdala, Jerusalem. Occupation, we are not told, but she seems to have been wealthy. Now, I am personally curious about whether this is the woman who had been a prostitute. Contemporaries. Jesus, the 12 disciples, Mary, Martha, Lazarus, and Jesus' mother Mary. Key verse. After Jesus rose from the dead early on Sunday morning, the first person who saw him was Mary Magdalene, the woman from whom he had cast out 7 demons. Mary Magdalene's story is told in Matthew 27 and 28, Mark 15 and 16, and Luke 23 and 24, and John 19 and 20. She is also mentioned in Luke 8, verse 2. We are going to read Luke 23 and 24. Save the page. Luke 23 and 24. Luke 23 and 24. Luke 23 and 24. Remember, my mother said to me, Luke was a physician, a Greek physician. He interacted with women much more as a doctor, much more than the Jewish men would have generally interacted with women. Okay. Luke 23 and 24. Luke 8, 2. Okay, let's go to Luke 8. Luke 8, verse 2. I want to get out my NIV study Bible and get other references going on. This doesn't give you all the detailed references. Luke 8, verse 2. All right, Luke 8. Soon afterwards, Jesus began a tour of the nearby towns and villages, preaching and announcing the good news about the kingdom of God. He took his 12 disciples with him, along with some women who had been cured of evil spirits and diseases. Among them were Mary Magdalene, from whom he had cast out 7 demons, Johanna, the wife of Chuza, Herod's business manager, Susanna, and many others who were contributing from their own resources to support Jesus and his disciples. Mary Magdalene. Okay. Also, Jesus stands before Pilate. A mighty roar, the crowd. Chapter 23. A large crowd trailed behind. He was carrying his cross. including many grief-stricken women. But Jesus turned and said to them, "Daughters of Jerusalem, don't weep for me. Weep for yourselves and for your children. For the days are coming when they will say, 'Fortunate indeed are the women who are childless, the wombs that have not borne a child, and the breasts that have never nursed. Fortunate are the breasts that have never nursed.' People will beg the mountains, 'Fall on us,' and plead with the hills, 'Bury us.' For if these things are done when the tree is green, what will happen when it is dry?" That's a great warning to the women. When the Roman officers overseeing the execution saw what had happened, he worshipped God and said, "Surely this man was innocent." And when all the crowd that came to see the crucifixion saw what had happened, they went home in deep sorrow. But Jesus' friends, including the women who had followed him from Galilee, stood at a distance watching. The women. As his body was taken, the women from Galilee followed and saw the tomb where his body was placed. Then the women went home and prepared spices and ointments to anoint his body. But by the time they were finished, the Sabbath had begun, so they rested, as required by the law. But early on Sunday morning, the women went to the tomb, taking the spices they had prepared. Sometimes with this wounded leg, I feel like the women are coming to visit me in a tomb. I'm stuck here. The women went to the tomb, taking the spices they had prepared. They found that the stone had been rolled away from the entrance, so they went in. But they didn't find the body of the Lord Jesus. As they stood there puzzled, two men suddenly appeared to them, clothed in dazzling robes. The women were terrified and bowed with their faces to the ground. The women. Then the men in the shining robes asked, "Why are you looking among the dead for someone who is alive? He isn't here. He is risen from the dead. Remember what he told you back in Galilee, that the Son of Man must be betrayed into the hands of sinful men and be crucified, and that he would rise again on the third day." Then they remembered that he had said this. So they rushed back from the tomb to tell his 11 disciples and everyone else what had happened. It was Mary Magdalene, Johanna, Mary the mother of James. That means Jesus' mom. And several other women who told the apostles what had happened. The women were the announcers. The women gave the first important news. That's why God keeps telling me, teach the women first. The men won't follow unless they realize that the women are carrying the information that the men ought to have and ought to be teaching as good fathers. Jesus has resurrected. The women told the apostles. The women told the hotshot good disciples what had happened. The women told the men the real truth. The women. But the story sounded like nonsense to the men. The stories that I tell often seem like nonsense to people. Well, my pastor never talked about that. Well, my pastor never said that. Well, my pastor has lots and lots of healings and lots of Holy Spirit anointings and lots of salvations. And what do you have? You have nothing. I don't know. You sound pretty crazy. The story sounded like nonsense to the men. The things that I say seem like nonsense to a lot of Christians. So the apostles didn't believe it. They didn't believe the women and their message. So Megan, this is for you too, because I'm trying to give to you because you've suffered enough. And you should rise up and be in the peace that you are deserved. The transformation of God comes to your house now. The men didn't believe it. The ones that actually followed Jesus didn't believe it. This isn't a problem, but this is something that you need to learn from. The people who have a lot of spiritual education will actually reject some of the most important news from people who don't seem powerful. The story sounded like nonsense, so they didn't believe it. However, Peter jumped up and ran to the tomb to look. Stooping, he peered in and saw the empty linen wrappings. Then he went home again, wondering what had happened. Wondering. That same day, 2 of Jesus' followers were walking to the village of Emmaus, 7 miles from Jerusalem. Here's the hot one. Come on, people. Settle into this. That same day, 2 of Jesus' followers were walking to the village of Emmaus, 7 miles from Jerusalem. Okay, now, how many times in the New Testament do you get mileages? Very rarely. What is walking speed? Walking speed is approximately 2.5 to 3 miles an hour. So 7 miles is over 2 hours of walking. It takes about 2 hours to walk from Jerusalem to Emmaus. So it's a 2.5 hour walk. 2 of Jesus' followers were walking to Emmaus. A 2-hour walk. As they walked along, they were talking about everything that had happened. As they talked and discussed these things, Jesus himself suddenly came and began walking with them. But God kept them from recognizing him. So Jesus sneaks in next to 2 guys. He sneaks in, and in other places it says he knew their thoughts. So he knows everything. He knew their thoughts. But God kept them from recognizing Jesus. Jesus sneaks in, and he's walking next to 2 guys in his resurrection form. He asked them, he's disguised and he's talking to them. He asked them, "What are you discussing so intently as you walk along?" What are you guys talking about? Obviously, you're talking really heavily about something. What are you talking about? They stopped short, sadness written across their faces. Then one of them, Cleopas, replied, "You must be the only person in Jerusalem who hasn't heard about all the things that have happened there in the last few days." "What things?" Jesus asked. Now, okay, let's reference back to the other place where it says, "And he knew their thoughts." I mean, he's literally just fooling with them. What things? Everybody's freaked out because the person who seemed to be Messiah has just been crucified by the Jews and Pontius Pilate. Everybody's sad. What things? Jesus asked. "The things that happened to Yeshua, the man from Nazareth," they said. "He was a prophet who did powerful miracles And he was a mighty teacher in the eyes of God. Now, okay, this is what I am. I am a truth speaker. A prophet is merely a person who forthtells truth. I have done powerful miracles. The miracle of a ton of cancer going away from Michelle. High blood pressure going down a couple of times. The sleep miracle that came to one woman who had a sleep affliction. I have been a truth speaker. I have done powerful miracles. But most importantly, the information that has been put in me has caused me to be a person who shares the mighty things that I have learned in the eyes of God. And all the people, anyone who comes near me, appreciates the things that I have to say and teach because they're fun, they're encouraging. The things that happened to Jesus, the man of Nazareth, he was a truth speaker who did powerful miracles. He was a mighty teacher in the eyes of God and all the people. But our leading priests and other religious leaders handed him over to be condemned. Now, through my life, I have been condemned and politely assassinated. Do you realize that you can push a person away from a person just by saying, oh, that guy's a little off base, I wouldn't listen to him? For 2 decades, a person can actually be sent away from a person who was sent to them for them to learn just by a couple of negative words from religious leaders. The religious leaders handed him over to be condemned to death. And you can kill a person just by sending children away from them so the children don't learn. And they crucified him. They unfriended and blocked him forever. We, the 2 people who were walking, we had hoped he was the Messiah who had come to rescue Israel. This all happened 3 days ago. The women were the ones that believed. Then some women from our group of his followers were at his tomb early this morning, and the women came back with an amazing report. The women said his body was missing and they had seen angels who told them Jesus is alive. The women. Some of our men ran out to see, and sure enough, his body was gone just as the women had said. That's why I want to teach and give empowerment to the women. Because the men have been standing in the sidelines and they don't want to stand up and talk about the difficult things that are real. The weaknesses of men, the tough teachings of Jesus that cause us to change our habits and our lifestyles and stop relying on the doctors and the science, to start caring for orphan children, to shelter all women. All women are supposed to be in the shelter of brotherhood and family, not in the dominating control, but in the balance of the complement. The women have the gift of body and a care about provision. The men have the gift of a slightly finer discernment and a bit less tricks from the dark side. But the women who have suffered have a sober mind. The women who have suffered the most, the women who are in a state of suffering, have a fiercer discernment. Then Jesus said to them, here, he's talking to these 2 guys, 2 of Jesus's followers. He says to 2 of Jesus's followers, this is what he's saying to him. Come on, focus. Then Jesus said to them, you foolish people, you find it so hard You are dull of mind and heart. You find it so hard to believe. You refuse to accept all that the prophets wrote in the scriptures. And the Christians refuse to believe what is actually written that Jesus tells us to do. The fabric over the heads of the women affect the men and affect the demonic battles. The fabric on the heads of the men disgraces Christ as if the veil wasn't torn. When we go into super powerful interaction with God, we're supposed to care about the fabric. We don't have to have a temple, but the fabric is the reminder of the passing away of the temple. He's telling them they haven't believed all the prophets. I'm telling people, you haven't believed what Jesus said. And he says to these people, wasn't it clearly predicted that the Messiah would have to suffer all these things before entering his glory? Now, check this out. This is one of the most heavy scriptures in the entire Bible. Then Jesus, on a 2-hour walk, took them through all the writings of Moses. The word all is twice in this passage. Oh, there it is. There it is. Jesus took them through the writings of Moses and all the prophets, explaining from all the scriptures the things concerning himself. In other words, he went through every single detail of messianic prophecy.